Lecture English MCQS Past Papers. 1. Who belongs to the absurd school of drama? A. Shaw. B. Beckett. C. Pindar. D. Eliot. E. None of these. 2. To the Lighthouse is written by A. Lawrence. B. Dylan Thomas. C. Hemingway. D. Virginia Woolf. E. None of these. 3. I am too much in the sun in Hamlet is spoken by A. Polonius. B. Claudius. C. Hamlet. D. Ophelia. E. None of these. 4. Ulysses is written by A. James Joyce. B. Virginia Woolf. C. Hardy. D. Forster. E. None of these. 5. Elizabeth is a character from Jane Austen's A. Emma. B. Pride and Prejudice. C. Mansfield Park. D. Northanger Abbey. E. None of these. 6. Tear Idle Tears is a poem by A. Frost. B. Browning. C. Tennyson. D. Eliot. E. None of these. 7. Thought Fox is written by A. Ted Hughes. B. Philip Larkin. C. Heaney. D. Sylvia Plath. E. None of these. 8. Major Barbara is written by A. Beckett. B. Pindar. C. Eliot. D. Shaw. E. None of these. 9. Lilliput is a character from A. Gulliver's Travels. B. Pygmalion. C. Sons and Lovers. D. Old Man and the Sea. E. None of these. 10. Fire and Ice is written by A. Eliot. B. Yeats. C. Frost. D. Auden. E. None of these. 11. Swift belonged to A. Renaissance period. B. Restoration. C. Romantic period. D. Augustan age. E. None of these. 12. The novel of Lawrence banned by the government was A. Sons and Lovers. B. Lady Chatterley's Lover. C. Women in Love. D. The Rainbow. E. None of these. 13. Undo this button is a line from Shakespeare's A. Hamlet. B. Othello. C. King Lear. D. Julius Caesar. E. None of these. 14. Ode to Psyche is a poem by A. Milton. B. Byron. C. Keats. D. Blake. E. None of these. 15. I am no Prince Hamlet is a line written by A. Shakespeare. B. Yeats. C. Eliot. D. Auden. E. None of these. 16. Things Fall Apart is a line from Yeats. A. Among School Children. B. Byzentium. C. Sailing to Byzentium. D. The Second Coming. E. None of these. 17. Good fluences make good neighbors is from Frost's A Revelation. B. Mending. C. Pasture. D. Birches. E. None of these. 18. April is the cruelest month of all is taken from Eliot's A. The Wasteland. B. The Hollow Man. C. East Coker. D. Prufrock. E. None of these. 19. A Farewell to Arms is written by A. Faulkner. B. Hemingway. C. James Joyce. D. Virginia Woolf. E. None of these. 20. A Passage to India is written by A. Forrester. B. Conrad. C. Lawrence. D. Hardy. E. None of these. 21. Ode to West Wind was written by A. Keats. B. Shelley. C. Byron. D. Blake. E. None of these. 22. Keats was born in A. 1770. B. 1779. C. 1795. D. 1790. E. None of these. 23. Dream Children was written by A. Leigh Hunt. B. Charles Lamb. C. Hazlitt. D. Ruskin. E. None of these. 24. Picture of Dorian Gray was written by A. Oscar Wilde. B. Dickens. C. Hardy. D. George Eliot. E. None of these. 25. Ruskin belonged to A. Romantic age. B. Modern age. C. Victorian age. D. Augustan age. E. None of these. 26. Wordsworth lived from A. 1770, 1832. B. 1775, 1859. C. 1770, 1850. D. 1770, 1802. E. None of these. 27. Heroes and Hero Worship was written by A. Mill. B. Thomas Carlyle. C. Macaulay. D. Coleridge. E. None of these.